Good evening, I'm Lisa Lord and welcome to One on One. On this episode, we take a deeper look into the work of the Child Care Board. The board has several responsibilities, and on the last program, we looked at the role of the government day nurseries and the foundation they lay for early childhood education. Now, children's homes also fall under the remit of the Child Care Board, providing a nurturing environment for children placed in residential care. There are currently 6 residential facilities catering to various needs and age groups. I got the chance to visit the Nightingale Children's Village, where 5 of those homes are located. I spoke to Marcia Burke, who has been caring for children for more than 3 decades. And in recent times, she has taken on the role of house parent.
My name is Marcia Burke. I'm a house parent. I've been working in the system from 1986, which is close to 35 years. September will be 35 years. I started as a children's attendant and graduated to assistant house parent and then rise to house parent. A house parent is someone who provides a homely setting for the child. She's responsible for the day-to-day running of the home, management of the home, making sure that all the children, their daily needs are met, socially, emotionally, physically. So that means that we are responsible for making sure that they are fed, making sure that their appointments are kept, observing to see that they are not encountering any problems. We are actually a parent figure in a daily setting. We do recognize that we are not the children's parent per se, but we fill that role because there are times when we have to be the caregiver, we have to be the mediator, we have to be the counselor, even though that is not our job description per se, but we make sure that the children are as comfortable as possible as they exist from day to day. So you get to form bonds, relationships, and you get to learn your children. So you know, you love them as you go on. Recognizing that each child is not the same and each one is different. They all have their special characteristics. So you have to deal with them as individuals, even though they are in a group setting. At present, I am here at Tice Cottage. I only started here in March after transferring from Sterling Children's Home. I work with a special group of boys, 7 boys, who have different behavior challenges. They are a lovely bunch. They all have different personalities, and I'm now getting to know them, and they're getting to learn me as well, and so far I've been enjoying it. Actually, looking back at it, I first encountered residential care when I was about probably 9 years old. I visited the Sterling Children's Home with my church group, and that was what made me realize that there was something I never knew before, that there was such a home or that catered for children who had nowhere to go. Little did I know that I would end back up in the system years later, because I started out, I just went to do a training program, and it involved child care, where I trained in the residential center for 1 week, in the daycare center for 1 week, and then I worked in the office for 2 weeks. So that training was for about 6 months, and after 6 months I was recruited again, and I took up the assignment in residential. And I was here ever since. Before, house parents would work like a 3-day shift. We would come on at 3 in the afternoon. So if I started on Monday, 3 o'clock, I would go off Wednesday, 3 o'clock. Then I would be off on Thursday, and I would go in on Friday, 3, and go out Monday, 3. So you spent a longer period in your work setting, because there you are providing, you're actually being the parent of the home, so you were there for a longer period. Well, right now we are working a 24-hour period, where our shift starts at 11 o'clock during the day and finishes 11 the next day. So while you are on duty, you are supposed to manage that home and make sure that the children's needs are met. When you develop those bonds, you have to realize you have to love what you do, first of all. And if you don't love what you do, then it doesn't mean anything to you. It wouldn't make any sense. But sometimes it's hard to see them go, because you wonder what would happen to them after, because some of them have potential to do well, and it brings a joy when you see them move on and gain careers and become individual, becoming parents in themselves. And when forming bonds, you recognize, because no matter what you do in the residential care, you have to recognize what your role is. And my role is a house parent to provide that mother figure, even though I'm not the parent. And when you form those bonds, you see it, because you get that joy when you walk around and you hear somebody say, "Auntie, hi, how are you doing?" And when you look around, you see somebody who has grown into a young man, a wonderful young man, or a wonderful young woman who have achieved in their tasks, and you know that you have contributed to it, because you would have been talking with them, you would have been grooming them along the years that they have been in care. And it brings joy to your heart. And they never forget you, no matter what, no matter how long it is. Sometimes you're walking and you just hear somebody say, "Auntie." But so many children have passed through your hands that sometimes you don't even remember the faces, but they do remember you. It is challenging in that sometimes the other child, in that child that has multiple personalities, needs your attention. The same time, some other child might also be needing your attention. So you have to be able to multitask and get that child to a state where you can deal with it at a later date, but know which one is the priority to deal with that child at the same time. It is difficult not to become attached to children, because children are a joy. I have no children of my own. Well, I claim children as my own. And there were times in years gone by where I used to take the children from care to my home. And that would have been a joy. And it's difficult, it's really difficult not getting attached, because when you see the children, sometimes they're so bubbly, they are so loving and caring. And it brings tears to your eyes, but to hear a child say, "I miss my mom. I want my mommy," but you know that you can't tell them, "Well, mommy is coming today," or "mommy is coming tomorrow." But you still have to be responsible in reassuring that child that mommy will be there at some point in time, even though you have no idea as to when mommy will come. But as to comfort that child, because that's part of your role, to be a mother figure, so you still have to provide the comfort and to make the child as comfortable as possible. So knowing and saying the right things at the point in time, so that you won't get the child being upset, or because sometimes the children would go into reserve. They do have reserve feelings, and you will sometimes see a child sitting and probably crying, and you wonder what's going on. And you have to have the right approach to get out of that child what is going on with it. So why are they crying? And not every child wants to talk. I don't think that the general public has a real idea as to the amount of care that is provided on a day-to-day basis from the house parents and even the attendants. Because sometimes, for instance, like getting them ready for school, you have to get up on mornings, you have to prepare breakfast, you have to make sure that they get their hair combed, that their school clothes are ready, that their books, and they have the required amount of books, and the bags are ready. And you know, you just hear about child care. Over the years, people would think that, "Oh, you're an orphan," you know, but we have come such a long way. Development has risen in terms of child care and the services that are offered, because when I started working, you never used to hear about child services, but now we have the development that you can interface with all of the child care services. You have the Tribe Center, you have Child Guidance Clinic that would cater to the needs. So when you see the progression and the stage of development through the child care services that are available, then I think the public needs to be aware. I think the general public is contributing, and I would take my hat off to those persons who contribute to the residential care, because we do depend on those non-government organizations a lot, which are very helpful. And even in this complex that we're on, most of our development has come from donations. And that's a great thing for the general public to realize that you do need assistance. The government cannot do it all. So if the general public can assist, that would be a great thing. When I started working in 1986, there were a number of children in care, and you had them all grouped together. And then as time progressed, you had them stratified in that you had all the babies placed in one center, all the toddlers placed in one center, all the adolescents placed in one center. And you have seen the progression in that. At this stage, there are less, what should I say, less teenagers coming into care, which is a great thing, because you realize that persons, maybe more parents are taking more responsibility in some areas. And I've been working with adolescents for maybe nearly 20 years, maybe 20, yeah, just about 20 years, because after the stratification came in. And you see, like now there are less adolescents in care, but you see an influx of smaller ones. So in time to come, it might be history repeating itself again, where you have the same amount, but I think that the numbers are less. Well, we've come to the stage where we no longer refer to children as orphans, because children come into care for something as simple as neglect, abuse, whether physical or sexual. You might have a situation where a house has been burned down and there's no place for the children to go, so they have to end up in care. There are various reasons, and I think the stigma has been removed. Recognizing that our children who are in care goes to almost any public school in Barbados. You would have those who go to the higher secondary schools as well as the lower secondary schools. And sometimes the way that child carries itself, you would not know that that child lives in a residential center. And some of them are very proud to say that they do live in residential centers, because the best care is in the residential center. You get the opportunities that are available to you. And I must say that there are lots of opportunities available. I would want to say to the general public, residential care is essential. It provides an avenue for a child to be given support, the necessary help that is needed when it is deserved, and that the parents who are out there who have children in care to play a more vital role in their children's lives, recognizing that even though we are house parents, we cannot fill that void. And that's something that I have learned over the years. No matter how long you've been there as a parent figure, there's still that void for mommy and daddy. And wishing that you could fill that void is the foundation, because you know you would have done your best. And to hear a child say, "Auntie, I love you," knowing that it has a mom, brings joy. But it would be a joy to hear the child saying to the mother, "Mommy, I love you." Because I think that's one of the things, when I look back over the years and see the different children with behaviors and things, you see the longing need to be with the parent. Because when a child is existing in a public school, especially when the child starts secondary life, adolescent life, that's where a lot of the challenges come. And they are often faced with a lot of peer pressure as well. And teenagers especially are ones who boast of things that they have and things that they can enjoy and what my mommy would do. So think about it. An adolescent in a residential center cannot say, "My mommy took me to Chauffette last night." They would have to say, "My auntie took me to Chauffette last night." Some might be clever enough to improvise and say, "Well, my mommy took me," because they would adopt certain aunties as their mummies or certain house parents as their mummies. But I think you recognize it when you hear them saying, "Oh, we were talking at school and so happened and I said this and I said that." So you recognize that the parents need to play a more vital role in the lives of children, of their children, knowing that they are their biological mothers. They are their biological parents. It's a pleasure to fill the void, because the pleasure is mine, because I don't have any children of my own, and I'm giving back something, that giving back the love, the care, and doing it because I love doing it. It's something that you have to enjoy. I don't see it as a job alone. I am comfortable in what I do. And I believe that is because of the Almighty God. I believe that He placed you in specific points for specific reasons. And we may not know it, but it might be very well our calling. Because it takes a special one, a parent to raise a special child. A special parent to raise a wonderful child. And when you look back and see the ones that have passed through your hands, you can sing joy. I would also encourage my fellow colleagues and co-workers to continue to rally around the banner in terms of residential care, to continue to give of their best, because it's a joy. It's not only a joy, but it's a service that you're giving. And when you do your best, you can only reap the best.
Now, some children do leave the children's homes and start life on their own, while others are either adopted or go into the care of foster parents. This is where the Gittins family comes in. They have been foster parents for the last 2 years. They told me about why they made the decision to foster a child and took me through the process of what has been a very rewarding experience so far.
Hi, my name is Wendy Gittins, and this is my husband, David Gittins, of 25 years, and we are foster parents. I always wanted a lot of children, and it was my dream from when I was young to have at least 6 children, coming from a family of 6. But, you know, with nowadays, you're professional, and the education and school education work gets in the way, and I was fortunate or unfortunate to just have 3. So with that in mind, and then my middle child, a girl, was very unhappy that we only had one girl and she wanted another girl. We considered fostering a long time ago, but David was a little hesitant because it was his first time dealing with children. So he asked if we could shelve the idea temporarily, because dealing with 3 children was a little much, and he couldn't think about how he could do 4. So we had filled out all the forms and whatnot, but then we shelved that until the first 2 went off to university, and the last was alone, and he asked for companionship. So we revisited the idea of fostering, and we were given a little boy.
Well, after a while, I realized, 4 is only one more than 3, and I guess by then I was more accustomed to dealing with children, and I figured I could probably handle one more. Yes, it is.
Yes, the responsibility is major. We had originally asked for a child between the age of like 9, 10. But in fostering, when you do your application, they try to match the child as best as with your family, so that the fitting in will be smooth. So apparently, I guess there wasn't a child in that age range that they thought would fit in with the family. So we were introduced to a little boy. He was 12 years old, and quite ironically, his last name fitted with our last name, so you couldn't ask for a better fit. He has been with us now. This is going 2 years. 2 years. So when we decided to look again at fostering, we obtained the paperwork, the application forms from the child care board. We filled them out. You had to get a medical done. Your doctor had to sign off on your medical condition. Then you filled out the forms with all the particulars they wanted to know. You also had to put down some references who would have known you for a while, and then you submit the form. I got a call from, I can't remember his name. I guess he's the person over fostering and adoption, and he asked me, how soon do you want the child? And I told him, yesterday. And he laughed. I remember he laughed and he said, it doesn't take that. It takes much longer than that.
What you said is right, but in addition, there were some lengthy processes like being interviewed by psychologists. They had a few meetings. They interviewed us individually, and they interviewed us together. I don't know if they were checking our story, but I guess they wanted to see if we were, as a family, if it would be a good fit, and if we had the right qualities, or if we had the right environment. They would have visited our home and
Spoken to your children.
yeah, and some people get you to ask for references but don't really check. But they actually called our references and got information to make sure that we had, I guess that we were suitable to bring a child into the home. My daughter was one, the people there to check. We can't remember if that was yeah, I think there was some requirement. We had to get something from a medical professional. So my doctor, they had to contact her about it. So, and the process was long, and I guess it was involved in terms of the different interviews and things, but fairly long. But it came to an end finally.
Well, we had challenges.
Yeah, but
In terms of the transition?
yeah, but what the child care board did to make it easier, they first brought the child. We had the introduction in the park. Then later they brought the child for like half a day, then brought him like for a day. So we were able to build a relationship gradually, and then one day they brought him and never came back for him. Right? But,
with our permission, of course.
and basically they had to get, he had to be okay with it and we had to be okay with it. And when they decided that both groups think that they can live together, then he came in. But then there were a whole set of specifications that they had. He had to have his own bed, so we had to go and buy a bed. And there were certain things that we had to get adjusted to. I would say it was difficult at first because you were bringing a total stranger into your house. And the total stranger it wasn't like a baby because he came at 12, so we brought a big 12-year-old boy into the house. Didn't know anything about him, and again, he was in a stranger's house too. So I guess the first few months it was us feeling out each other, trying to get comfortable with each other. But now I think we've reached the stage where there's no real difference between him and our children who we had naturally. Right? He's fully a part of the family. And I think he's also very comfortable with us as well.
Yeah, he's asked what is he going to inherit. That was one of his questions. The child care board, they do the periodical checks. They come in. He's been given, or we have been given, an officer, and she checks in on us, and then we talk via WhatsApp. If we have an issue, we will talk to her about it, ask any advice, and they also do occasional workshops to which the foster parents are invited to.
I don't think it is much different from being any other parent.
No.
The only difference is that there are certain legal requirements. For example, if you wanted to go on vacation overseas,
That has to be planned.
Yeah, we would need permission. There's certain things that we would need permission. If you want to take him to the doctor initially, we would have to tell them we would like to take him to the doctor.
Yes.
Right? But apart from those sort of things, which may have a legal implication, it's the same as anything else. I think one of the problems is that the process is long and drawn out. And if you're having doubts and you're going through a very difficult process, it's easy to give up. I've heard of people who started fostering and it went on for years. So that's one, the issue, the process, it takes too long and it's fairly intrusive. Another thing is, I think it's just not part of our culture. In the old days you would hear maybe someone had a child and an old lady in the district took the child or aunt took the child. But they didn't have to go through any interviews, they didn't have to get any medicals, they didn't have to go to any seminars, they didn't have to give references, they just took the child.
They didn't have to make sure that the child had its own bed, you know, it could lie on the bed with somebody else, you know, so in the old time days it was much easier, but now, you know, a lot of red tape, which the red tape is there, but it can turn to green, and when it does turn to green, you enjoy the child. I mean, he gives us sometimes of laughter, you know, sometimes you do want to pull out your hair because he's just like any other child, you know. There were some psychological problems that we experienced. Our foster child, Kate, was in the foster home from, I think he was 6. So he spent those formative years in the foster home, in the child care board home. So when he came to us, he didn't have that experience of living in a home with a family per se, and he modeled himself to our son. So we would be going out and we would say, do you want something to eat? And he would say no. But as soon as our other son said, oh, well, I want a roti, then our foster son would say, yes, I want a roti. You know, he just copied everything our other son was doing. And that became really, really an issue where our other son felt as though he was being copied, he was being cloned, and he wanted to be his own person, but then here is another clone which he thought was not even a perfect clone living with him. I mean, if my son came in and put his bag there, my other son would come in and put the bag the same place. And eventually we did have to seek help from the psychologist in that aspect. That behavior was explained to us. It was told, you know, because he had no experience of being in a family setting, he took his cues from someone who was already in the family setting. But we understood it, but it was hard for our son to understand that. All he could see was that here's somebody trying to be me. But eventually, they finally, you know, separated and became two people.
Fostering is a sort of temporary arrangement, whereas adoption is permanent. When you foster a child, if things don't work out, you theoretically can send back the child.
Which is not nice.
But with adoption, it's yours for good. When they leave the child there with you, they'll never look back. Basically, it is yours.
Yes, with the adoption, you know, you have to go through a legal process. You have to pay money. The child takes on your name. The child is yours. For fostering, the Child Care Board still has a lot of input in the raising of the child and continuously monitoring the family.
I think one of the greatest rewards is seeing positive change.
Yes.
When he first came, there were a lot of things he didn't know, or there's some behaviors he had, and part of it would have been like any other child, because some of the things I've seen with him, I've seen my own children who were not raised in a home, but some of them would be as a result of the home. We'd been warned by the Child Care Board that the children from foster homes do not necessarily excel in school. And when he came, well, he wasn't the worst. He wasn't doing fantastic. We worked with him a lot, and this year he got some sort of special praise from the headmaster because he done so well. So actually, one of the teachers actually told us, you know, we can really see a difference in him since he's gone with you, because academically he made significant improvement. So that's something I feel good about.
I think he's more confident in himself as well. Before, you know, he wouldn't talk so much to adults. With children, yes, he would talk, but he's been more confident since coming here.
I find that he has responded well to people showing that they care about him and they're concerned about him. There's certain behaviors that, you know, it took a little while to change. All of them haven't changed yet. But by letting him see that we're genuinely interested in him, we're interested in his well-being, interested in his health, interested in his academics, I think that has helped him to actually change towards what we wanted. So yeah, I do believe that like other children, because of similar things have happened with other children some of our other children, we're just let them understand we're not telling you this because we're miserable or because we're old or because we're stupid, but we actually are telling you things to help make your life likely to be better, to help make you happier, to help make you healthier. Remember with my first two children, they took long to admit to us that they thought that we were two idiots. The things that we used to tell them, they admitted one day, yeah, we really thought y'all were idiots. But as they got older, they realized that it was that we had wisdom and that we were not idiots. Mm-hmm. And that listening to us, in most cases, helped them develop themselves and help them be happy and healthy and successful.
I would say to anyone who wants to foster, and let me say that you don't have to be married to foster. You can be a single mom, right? I would say go ahead. You will have challenges, but the Child Care Board is there to help you with the challenges. Yes, love can get you over certain hurdles, but you also have to make sure you put rules in place, right? David was talking about we showing them love and giving rules and whatnot. Just a little story. One day our foster son we were doing whatever, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, who's your favorite child?" You know, but without a beat, I said, "Oh, I love all my children the same, all 4 of them." And he smiled broadly and went on his way.
I would say, like any big project is something to think about and to consider the whole thing. Don't just think of, okay, I'll have a new person with me, but think, how will I adapt and what do I need to put in place to bring that new person into my home? because it's a relationship, and it's a relationship which, even though fostering is temporary, you have to look at it as permanent. This person that I don't know who would have come up with different rules, different training, different values, is now going to live in the same space as me. And we both want to be happy and want the relationship to be productive. So it's something to give some thought to, because children are very impressionable, and if you bring a child into a fostering relationship and you don't spend enough time making sure that you do what's necessary, you may end up hurting the child more than helping. So I say give it a lot of thought. Think of all the changes you need to do. Think of things like where do you have to take the child to school? You know, does the child have any special dietary needs, any special physical needs? So look at the entire picture so that you plan well, so that the fostering journey would be a lot more easy for both you and the child.
As the Gittins explained, sometimes children carry behaviors that result from traumatic experiences. Josette Sam is the clinical psychologist with the Child Care Board and told me about the signs to look for when dealing with trauma and the overall well-being of a child.
So when we're talking about trauma, we are basically talking about experiences that overwhelm person's coping skills. But a more formal definition would be where a person's subjective perception of an event or experience where they perceive as being threatening to their life or to their physical integrity, and which causes a sense of helplessness, fear, horror, or disgust. What you need to understand though, because you may be overwhelmed by a situation doesn't mean that it is traumatic. So remember, subjective perception. So what may be traumatic for you may not necessarily be traumatic for somebody else, and the level of trauma one person may experience may not be the same level that another person experience. So when we're thinking about trauma, so you have the obvious like accidents, car accidents and so forth, and then you have things like abuse, physical abuse, you have physical, you have sexual, you have emotional abuse, you have neglect, things like domestic violence or community violence, loss of a family member, a parent, a loved one, even things like bullying and so forth. And sometimes it is not, sometimes it doesn't have to happen to the child specifically, but it's being aware or witnessing it being happening to a family member or someone that is dear to them as well. So those things can create traumatic effects in children. So one of the things that happen is that when children experience trauma, so you do have some symptoms happening. So for example, you have the child may re-experience the traumatic event in their mind, and you may also have what we call flashback, or the child may have distressing dreams or nightmares. You may also have avoidance, where that child now is going to try to avoid everything that may remind them of such. So if it's a person that may have interfered with them before, they may want to go around that person, all of a sudden they no longer want to go there, or they no longer want to go to school. You would also see sometimes the reenactment of certain aspect of the trauma in the child's play. So for example, say if we're talking about sexual abuse, you may see that coming out in play with dolls, or may come out in play with their peers. You would also have a lot of hyper arousal or hypervigilance, and basically what that is, the child is always in a state of alertness and always trying to see what else is threatening out there, trying to get at them. The problem with that though is that when they're always in that state of alertness, then they tend to misinterpret social cues, whether they're neutral or ambiguous, as hostility towards them, and so therefore you're going to have extreme reactivity where normally you wouldn't have such. They also may lose interest in activities that they were once interested in. You may also see they may have negative moods, a persistent negative mood where they are no longer joyful, always sad, always seeming down. They may even forget certain aspects of the trauma that occurred to them. You will have a lot of psychological distress and reactivity. When that happens, then you would also, all of this will be exhibited in things like anxiety. You will have depression. You will have a lot of anger. We see a lot of anger and aggression when it comes to trauma and children. You would have disruptive behavior. Sometimes you would have self-harming behaviors where children cut. You may see concentration issues. Children may do a lot of daydreaming and zoning out. You have fear in there. You may see a drop in academic performance. But having said that, also you may also not see that because children may also engage in avoidance strategies. Basically, so a child may become more active in sports or even their lessons to try to suppress whatever trauma memories may be occurring. Some children may turn to drugs as a result. So when it comes to trauma, it is important for persons or for parents to understand that when they see a different level of functioning, because they're going to be functioning differently than they're accustomed, then you need to find out what is happening with your child. Because it's the functioning that is going to, the level of functioning that is going to tell you something is wrong. So if you normally have a happy, bubbly child, and all of a sudden you have a child that is withdrawn, because one of the things that is also affected is their self-esteem. You know, when a child now is no longer as confident in themselves and so forth, you need to find out what is happening with that child. Because what happens, remember I talk about hyperarousal and hypervigilance, because the child now is scanning the environment and always in that state of alertness to ensure that what happened doesn't happen again or similar traumas don't happen to them. It means that when they know then any stimuli that comes in, because they're going to misrepresent it as something that is hostile towards them. So when parents miss it, when teachers miss it, they put it down to the child behavior, the child aggressive, the child rude, the child disrespectful without really understanding the child trauma's history. So then that parent or that adult is going to respond a particular way, and what that does then is reinforce to the child that the world is indeed a dangerous place, that indeed how they are perceiving that stimulus is actually how it is. Because when it comes to trauma, it really changes the child's perception of how he or she sees him or herself, others, and the world. It disrupts the child's psychological sense of safety. That takes us back to the very beginning of the psychosocial development stage. I don't know if you've heard of it, trust versus mistrust. So at that stage, the child learns that when he or she cries, his needs or her needs are met, they are protected. When trauma occurs, it actually disrupts that. It tells the child that the world is no longer safe. The people that I depend on, I can no longer depend on. And so what it does, it changes the child's whole perception of how he or she sees himself and the world altogether. And so that is what then we have to work with, because then with that comes a lot of other issues. Because the other thing too about trauma, because we have something called adverse childhood experiences, which is the same thing about trauma, you know, but except that, you know, they can be acute or chronic. We're continuously in this environment. And research has shown that it actually changes children's brain development. A child needs a positive environment, positive experiences to develop properly. And if you don't have that, what it can do is actually disrupt brain development, and then you will have issues in terms of your emotion, behavior, and learning. So it is very difficult if the child is always on the alert to have relaxation time to actually take in and learn anything. So when you realize that there's a change in your child's level of functioning, now there's some things that you need to do. I always advocate that parents should develop a healthy, quality relationship with their children, and that needs to happen. Because if you have that, you have something then that you can work from. So it is a matter now of talking to the child and engaging the child. With very young children, we do a lot of play therapy. With older children that may be able to talk and so forth, you may do more talk therapy, some CBT, wherever they're at, because we try to meet the children where they're at. Right? So it's important that the parent try to find out exactly what is going on with the child. And it's important that they listen, because sometimes, too many times, parents do not listen to their children. And what that also does, it affects their self-esteem. Right? Because sometimes, it's you're talking foolishness, shut up, things like that. Parents need to listen to their children, and they need to validate the feelings that are coming out from what their children are saying. When it comes to abuse, sometimes, particularly sexual abuse, sometimes the children are not believed, sometimes they're demonized. So think about a child at that young age and what that can do to a child. Imagine what that child's life or world now looks like, where you had your parents, everybody believed in you, you had that support, and all of a sudden, because you say something, then this is what happened. You no longer feel the love, you no longer feel the acceptance, and you're only 8, 9, 10, 11. All right? So imagine how that child perception or worldview has changed. So you have to validate that, and you have to reaffirm your love and your support for the child. The other thing is you have to also model healthy behavior and allow the child to speak, because when you don't allow the child to speak about his or her experiences, you're telling the child that this thing is so big that it overwhelms you too, and therefore you can't talk about it. So therefore they don't have an out. And we as adults know that when something is bothering us, we like to vent. All right? So allow the child to speak. So you have to do that. The other thing is, because sometimes some of the experiences also overwhelm parents, they also have to deal with their trauma-like effects. So if, for example, we know when it comes to abuse, many times the perpetrators, especially sexual abuse, are known to the family. So if it's a situation, for example, where it's an uncle or it's your partner or your husband, now look at the effect that that is going to have on you. And so therefore, sometimes because you are not able to deal with that, then you don't deal and interact with the child the way that you need to. So you also need to deal with that so that you can interact properly and give that child the support that you need. So sometimes you may need to do a couple sessions yourself, right? And then also, depend on what it is. I was going to say, if you think you can't handle it, then you need to seek professional help for your child. And I take that back, if you think you can't handle it, because then sometimes parents may not think that the child needs the help, but the child really does need the help. So when you find that your child has gone through a serious trauma, or something that causes them not to cope, causes their behavior to be off, then you need to get help for that child. There's always the child guidance clinic, that is through the psychiatric hospital. And I think you also get to them through the schools. There are guidance counselors in the secondary schools. The Ministry of Education also, they have counselors in the primary school. So there's help out there. Right? And if you don't know where to start, you can always ask the child's teacher or the child's headmistress, where can I get help for this child? And I guess because many parents may see it in light of whether they are assessed as a good parent, and I think that's where that comes from, whether people are assessing them as a good parent, a good enough parent, or a bad parent. But I think what needs to happen is that we need to concentrate on the children, because the children is where it's at. And if you're talking about having healthy children that can develop into citizens that are productive, then you need to do what you need to do to assist your child in that. Because the thing about abuse, the thing about adverse childhood experiences is that they have long life effects. So, for example, a research has shown that they did with persons over 60, that those persons that had a history of trauma actually had a higher rate of suicide attempts than persons that did not. Research also shows that persons that have a higher number of adverse childhood experiences have a higher risk of physical and mental health issues. So if it continues like that, you can see that, there are real issues in the long run if you do not get the necessary help for the child. So you have to then decide what is more important, your pride or the mental health and well-being of your child. There is a stigma attached to mental health, and it has been there for quite a while. But I think it comes from a fear. Normally, what we don't understand, what we don't know, we tend to fear. But it's important to understand that when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about mental disorders, these things are managed. They are managed through medication, they are managed through therapy. So these things can be managed. And I think it's about time that we need to stretch our minds and understand that these are not things that we need to be fearful of. And I must say the media played a big part in this stigma, because coming up watching a lot of movies, and they give a wrong portrayal of mental illness, and persons were always violent and then doing a lot of things. But something as simple as persons may not know this. They may hear the term ADHD, but ADHD is classified, as a mental disorder, adjustment disorders. So for example, another thing that can cause trauma in children is divorce in parents. So when a child goes through something like that, or death of a loved one, there's adjustment disorders that may occur. And guess what? Those are classified as mental disorders as well. So, it's how you see it. But the important thing is we need to look away from the classification and understand that these children need help. If we say that the children are our future, then we have to play a part to ensure that we do what we can to secure our future. I think the biggest mistake that parents make is they tend to decide that because they don't understand the importance of understanding from the child's perspective, is that this child is just being difficult. This child is just being hard ears, as opposed to understand that, this may be an outgrowth of what has happened to the child. Because remember, when a child experiences, especially chronic trauma, what happens, that whole sense of helplessness. So for example, a child that may give up easily in school, and you may, but he got potential, but he doesn't even try, and so forth. But go back in the child history, go back into the child's development. Are there experiences where the child feels so helpless that what has happened now is that in everything else in his life, he doesn't see, or she doesn't see a sense of trying because it's useless, because that is what the child is accustomed to. We talk about things like fulfilling prophecy. When a child accustomed hearing a lot of negatives, eventually they internalize, and eventually they may end up exactly what you are seeing. So we have to also understand how we are impacting our children. I always say this. The biggest lie that I've ever heard, we have a lot of sayings and cliches that isn't true. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. That is the biggest lie I have ever heard. A lot of our children, a lot of us adults are in the position we are today and have mental issues because of the words that were spoken to us, the type of interactions that we've had with our families, with our peers. Right? So we have to understand how we also are impacting our children. Children need supportive environments to grow up in. And if you don't give them that, you may very well have issues.
So whether a child has been placed in a home, lives with his or her biological parents, or has been adopted or is being fostered, all children need is love, attention, and sometimes just someone to listen. I'm Lisa Lord. Good evening.